Properties window is another feature that I would say is pretty unique to Revit. It gives us the ability to look at the properties of both views and also objects in our project. So let's take a peek. So right now we are basically in a sheet view, and to really understand the power of working in the properties window, let's come down to our project browser and let's scroll up till we get to our floor plan section, and let's go ahead and left click on level 1 together. Now, as I mentioned, properties window allows us to access the properties of our views and also building elements, but it all depends on what you select. So if I select here in the white space or the empty space, I'm going to have access to my views, in this case the floor plan. But if I were to select any building element in my project, so let's say we left clicked on these double doors, I now have the access to the properties associated with my door. So let's take a look at the building element before we jump into the properties of this view. So with my door selected, and I know it's selected because it's blue here, I can see the areas within this properties window. So the first area when you're working in the properties window, especially when you're working with your families or your building elements here, is going to be our type selector. Because we have that door selected, I can come to the type selector, I can expand this, and I have the option to select and change building elements in place as long as they're loaded into my project. So I'll show you what I mean here. So right now we have the double doors, and we could tell graphically and also the way it reads. But what if I wanted to switch this to, oh, we'll say pocket doors? Well, I can come down here and take a look at this area here. It actually switches it in place. And it also makes sure that this fits into the wall. So it automatically crops and fits elements. So this is going to come in handy. And this is also kind of reinforcement. And this is a good way to kind of illustrate how Revit handles change in projects. I don't have to go back in detail walls and cut elements into walls. I can change elements in place when change occurs, and Revit is intuitive enough to make those adjustments and detail them out correctly into the wall. With that that pocket door still selected, I'm going to go back to my double door, and you can see I can go right back to that, and the annotation comes back with it as well. So that's the type selector. That's going to come in handy when you have objects in place and maybe you need to do some swapping, maybe changes occur. Type selector is going to be very handy for you as long as you have those elements loaded in your project. Just below that, we have the Edit Type button here. And basically what this does, it displays the properties for the family type that we have selected. In our case, it's going to be the set of double doors. So now I'm just going to simply left click on it, and you can see we have access to the family and the family type. Not only that, the type parameters associated with this, we also have access to. So we can work with things like the construction, which means I can adjust the function. I can work with things like material and finishes, so I can adjust the door metal, the door material. I can adjust the door frame. We can even adjust some of the dimensions here. So under dimensions, I can work with things like thickness and height. And if we look just to the right of those parameters here, we can actually see their values. So we have the parameter here on this section, and then just to the right in this section, we have the values associated with those parameters. So for instance, the thickness of this particular door is 51 units. The height of this door is 2,134 units. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit further to kind of explore some more of the properties associated with this. And again, the great thing about this is making any changes in here will change the door that's already in place. Again, that's that change management issue there, which is super helpful. I can work with analytical properties, which we won't get too deep into. Again, the goal here is to get us up and running in Revit and comfortable with it, coming straight from AutoCAD. But we do have the ability to work with things like thermal resistance and also some solar heat gain coefficients to do some analysis, real-world analysis on our building elements. Identity data is another section you'll find in this area here for type properties. This is where we can actually put in manufacturer data. We could put in websites associated with products. We could put in things like assembly code, fire rating, and even cost if you're working with cost estimates. And then we can also work with IFC parameters, and we really won't get into that. Again, trying to keep it as simple as possible so we can get you up and running. But just know that your type properties are going to be very powerful for you. They're going to allow you to really control things and achieve that design intent you want within your project. Now, while we're here still in our type properties, the ability to load projects is here as well. So we can, or load families, excuse me. We can simply load families by left-clicking that, and we'll do that a little bit later, but we can duplicate and rename as well. If you want to load a family, we can duplicate it, rename it, make adjustments to any of its parameters, and then by doing that, what we've done is we've preserved the original one that it was duplicated from, and we've created a more unique family based on the starting port or based on the parameters of the door we duplicated. So essentially, we created an extra door that fits our design intent. So I'm going to close out of this, and that takes care of the type properties area of our families. So now, if we scroll down just below that, you could see the various sections within our area here. And I'm just going to click on any of these titles, and you can see basically what we're working with is the constraints, the construction, materials, finishes, identity data, and also phasing. So I'm going to click on any of those, and what it'll do, it'll expand the options I have to work with. So when I click on the gray, it'll either close it or expand it. I usually keep them all open, and I just access my window as needed so I can see everything that's in there. Now under constraints, for this door here, a good example of some of the constraints we have to work with is we're going to make that door has to be on level 1 and maybe even a sill height for this door. We can adjust the construction, which is the frame type, and just like in the type properties here, we can work with things like materials and finishes, identity data, and even phasing, and we really won't get into that too much. But that is the properties and also the type properties associated with families once they're selected. So now let's take a look at what happens with the view. So if I scroll out a little bit and I just click here in space, I'm basically selecting my view. I come back into my properties window, and now you can see my type selector. I have my floor plan available. And just below that, let's take a look at some of the properties associated with a view as opposed to with an actual family. So with a view, we have the ability to work with some properties in the graphics. So this area is graphics. I can control the scale just like we did in our view control bar. I can also work with things like detail level. So I can adjust that from coarse, medium, or fine. And again, that's another basically property that's available to us in our view control bar. So those are just a few elements located in the graphics section. Another area that we'll actually get a little bit and dive a little bit more deeper into is going to be our visibility graphics override. And the great thing about this is you can almost compare this to layers in AutoCAD. So basically the ability to control how elements are displayed, the hatch patterns associated with them, the color, and even line weights, and even the visibility, whether you can see an element in a view or whether an element is hidden. So we have that ability to kind of control that. That's very similar to working with line type, line weight, and freezing and thawing layers in AutoCAD. So those are just a few of the things we can actually control as far as views. We can actually set up underlays as well within our type properties. So if I wanted level 1 or level 2 to be an underlay of whichever respective view we're in, I can do so simply by coming down here, expanding, and selecting which view I want to underlay in this particular view. I can control the extent of my view as well. So I have the ability to crop views. I can basically adjust the view range within my view. I can set up a scope box as well to include only things located in my scope box, and that works really well for performance, and also if you're doing some rendering and you don't want Revit to focus all of its brain power or attention on every element in your model, you can use a scope box to kind of really hone things in a little bit. We can work with elements like depth clipping as well, which comes in handy when we're working with elevations, when we're trying to really have elements that may be closer to the eye be represented by darker, heavier lines, and maybe elements in our elevation view that are further away from the eye. We want those to be represented by more faint or grayed out lines. We have the ability to control that there. And again, we'll explore that later. Identity data, which is something we saw in our type properties, we have that ability there for the view as well. And the type of identity data that's associated with views are any templates, the levels, and even the title on the sheet. And we won't really jump into phasing too much, again, trying to keep it as simple as possible. But that basically takes care of our properties window. So the takeaway for this one, your properties window allow you to get access to your families and building elements located in your project in your view. And you also have the ability to access the properties of views by themselves as long as no building element is selected. So in the next video, I want to talk a little bit more about this visibility graphics override And I want to show you some of the things it has in common with the functionality in AutoCAD's layers. So I'll meet you in the next clip where we'll explore the visibility and graphics overrides.